Okay, welcome back to part 2 of this series for first-time handgun buyers. Today, let's talk about grips. Different types of grips on the guns. When you're talking to the counter clerk dude at the gun store, and you're talking about all these different guns that he's got in the case and everything, and somebody comes up and says, you just find the one that feels good in your hand. Find the one that's comfortable. What does that mean? And is comfort important? Let's talk about it. So, first off, if you don't know a whole lot about guns, maybe you've never shot a gun or not very much, and somebody says, find a grip that's comfortable in your hand, what do you have to compare that to? I mean, how many things in the world do you hold that have little miniature explosions go off in your hand and throw projectiles away that you have to aim? I can't think of many things. So if you don't already have that experience and somebody says that, the only thing you can relate it to is going to be that one time that you played baseball and were holding a baseball bat, or maybe a golf club, or your kitchen knife. It's not going to translate. So let's change our mindset on that. So let's think about what the gun is for in this context is going to be self-defense, fighting type stuff. Typically, when you're in a self-defense situation, or if you're fighting someone, it's actually not comfortable. I mean, at least it hasn't been for me. And I could be doing it wrong, but for the most part, it's not a comfortable, pleasant, enjoyable experience. So maybe that's not the first criteria. When we're looking at these different types of grips on these guns, you can have something that's, very smooth on the front strap. Maybe it's textured on the sides, and maybe it's very contoured, oval shaped, like this 1911, or maybe like this Browning High Power, where you've even got some rubber here. That's good with finger grooves that might help get a little more grippy. But if it's too rounded and contoured, kind of like this smooth wood grip on this single action 22. If you're in a fighting context, especially, but even just shooting in general, you're trying to control the recoil of this thing going off, and you're kind of fighting with the gun a little bit in a way. You don't want something that's going to twist around easily in your hand. And if we take a look at our hands, as you close your hand, it's going to want to create a cylindrical shape. See? So if you put another cylinder inside of that, or even just a elliptical oval type shape into your hand already, well, you can already see that the rounded edges here are going to match with the rounded curvature of your fingers, and it's going to be a little more apt to slide around side to side. Well, that's not what we want. We want straight stability when we're shooting. So what if we instead find something that's a little more squared off, like this Glock? It's very straight, kind of like a rectangular shape to it. You can kind of see that. There are some finger grooves here, but that's about it. It's more square in nature. So now you're putting a square peg in a round hole, and it doesn't want to move. See, it's much easier to keep that thing locked in place with that square grip. So it's not more comfortable. It's actually much less comfortable to be holding something akin to a 2x4 in your hand as opposed to a round pipe. But it's more controllable, especially under recoil or if somebody were to grab the gun and try to take it from you, it's going to be easier to hold on to that gun. Now, other than that, let's think about the length of the gun, like how long it is from the back to the front, the back strap to the front strap. Some new terminology for you. Back strap, front strap. You're going to sound like a pro by the end of this. So now what we're looking at is, can my hand get around the gun enough to where my trigger finger can reach the trigger properly? And this is where most people come into a bit of a problem, because while you need to have your finger reach the trigger, and by the time the trigger breaks, and this is going to depend on the type of gun, if it's a striker fire, double action, single action, which you should now know what all that means if you paid attention. It's going to be a little different with each gun and how big your hands are, how long your fingers are, and all that stuff. And what we want to see ideally is that when I go to pull the trigger and the trigger's about to break, I would like to see light in between my knuckle and the frame of the gun. So some little bit of space there before I break the shot. That's ideal, because what that means is I'm able to get my finger in the middle of the trigger, which is where I want it for this type of shooting anyway. It's going to get a little more complicated, but just trust me. We'll go into it more when we talk about trigger press and all that kind of stuff. But for now, we want the trigger to land in the middle of the first pad of your finger. Not necessarily in the knuckle, and we don't want to be stretching with the tip of our finger to get a hold of it. And that does happen. People with smaller hands or really big guns, or the combination of the two especially, you're going to be really reaching to get your finger on that trigger, and maybe you're only touching it with the very tip of your finger. And the problem with that is a lot of times what will happen, especially starting out when you're learning how to shoot, is if you've only got the tip of your finger on the trigger and you pull the trigger, a lot of times you'll end up pushing the gun as you pull the trigger, and all your shots will go to the left. Or if you're wrong-handed, they'll go to the right. So we don't want that. So we want to make sure that when you grip the gun, you can properly reach the trigger and get the trigger in the middle of the first pad on your finger, where your fingerprints are, like the swirly little lines on your finger there. That's what you want, right in the middle of the trigger. So if you can do that and have a little bit of space, oh, you can even see this when I'm doing. If you have a little bit of space here, that's best. Now, in order to get that, you don't want to have to crank your hand all the way around the gun to where you just have your thumb behind the gun and nothing else. Ideally, we want to have as much of your forearm behind the gun as possible. You can get away with a little bit. It's fine. You know, like if I see if I can get a good angle here. If I don't have it straight and I have to come around a little bit, I can pretty much get away with that. But if I'm way cocked over here, that's going to be a problem. That probably looked completely retarded, but I'm going to leave it in. So once you've grabbed the gun, you feel like it's stable in your hand from left to right movement, you know you can get your finger on the trigger the way it needs to be by the time the trigger breaks. And I'm saying by the time the trigger breaks because, as you can see with this gun, you've got some give before the trigger is actually going to break here. See that movement there? So by the time, maybe I'm not all the way in the middle at this all the way forward position with the trigger, but by the time I get to here, I need to be in that proper position with my finger. Whereas with some other guns, it might be a little easier because they might not have so much travel. So like with this 1911, there's not really very much travel here. If you see, I can get my finger in place, and then with just a barely little bit of movement, it's there. So I know, okay, if I feel my finger right there, I'm good. And it's got the amount of space that is needed. With other guns, it might be a little more difficult. Like with some revolvers, you can see there's a lot of space here. So now, turn it this way so you can actually see what I'm doing. I'm going to show this to myself. I already know what I'm talking about. Now, if I'm really reaching to get my finger on the trigger here, I got a major problem. This is a much longer, heavier trigger pull, and I'm not going to be able to do much like that. So I need to really make sure, probably with a knuckle actually wrapped around the trigger on this one, but if we're just going for the bare minimum in the middle of the finger, I've got to make sure that I've got big enough hands to make that happen. Otherwise, you might want to look for something else or look for different grips. You can usually change the grips out on all these revolvers, make them smaller, bigger, wider, thicker, however you want. Then there's the length of the grip. Now, if it's a full-size gun, that's usually going to feel more comfortable for most people because they can get a good full grip, maybe even have a little space left, and it's going to feel nice and controllable. I almost said comfortable. Controllable. But it's going to be more difficult to conceal carry if that's what you're looking to do, if you're one of those types. I open carry a lot, so it doesn't matter to me. I carry whatever I want. But if it matters to you and you need to conceal carry, this is going to be difficult because you're going to have to hide this whole thing, this long piece right here. Same thing like with this. I mean, that's a lot to hide. So you end up going to a smaller grip on the gun, and that's way easier to conceal. However, now when you grip the gun, maybe if your hands are normal sized, your pinky's hanging off the bottom. So that's, again, not really a huge problem. It's just something that you'll have to get used to, knowing that this is going to hang off a little bit. And you can get extended magazines and grips and all kinds of stuff to fix that. It will kind of play a little bit as to how, like, when you go to reload, like reloading is a little more difficult. You can kind of pinch your skin into, like I just did, into the mag well right there. So you got to make sure you actually kind of pull your hand back a little bit and get that seated in there. We'll talk about that in a later video, so keep watching. But that's definitely something to think about, and you definitely need to probably shoot a gun like that before you buy one if you can, to try to make sure that you can get used to it and it's not going to mess you up too bad, which if you have a competent instructor, such as myself, it won't be a problem because we'll make sure that you know what to do and how to handle that. Or you can just keep watching my videos and I'll help you out anyway. So one thing we can do with that is if you just curl your pinky underneath and then get your regular grip, that'll usually fix it just fine. Or again, you can do a grip extension or something. Now, the other thing about grips that you need to think about is, okay, my shooting grip or my trigger finger grip is feeling good. Now what about my support hand? Well, it's ideal if you've got enough space on the grip and the frame here to get your other hand on the gun itself, like making contact with the firearm and not just your fingers. So if you've got a much smaller grip, like maybe on this 22, see, I don't have a ton of space here. So I can kind of wedge my hand up in there, but I'm mostly making contact right here on my own fingers. And then I can just kind of feel my palm pushing in to the grip and the frame and everything right here. And that's okay. But if it's too small, it just won't be as controllable with your support hand. You'll have to do more control with your shooting hand, which again, you can all be trained around. It's just something to keep in mind. So don't automatically think that a gun is too big for you. So that's what a lot of people do. It's easy to think that maybe a gun is too small for you with that in mind, but a lot of people think that the gun is too big for them, and the only way it really is too big for them is if their finger can't reach the trigger properly. Then it probably could be. But if they can do that, having a ton of space open here is not necessarily a bad thing. If you need to shoot one-handed, that's okay. You can just pull your thumb down and kind of cover that gap in pretty good. And with maybe a couple other techniques that we can go over later, you can still control the gun just fine like that. However, if you do have that space available to you, now you can get a lot of your hand on the gun itself and really crank down on the gun and control it very, very well. And that's what you want. You want as much control out of this thing as possible. Another thing to think about is grip angle. So on this Glock, the grip angle comes out pretty steep out this way, which angles your hand a little bit closer to the axis, the bore axis. So you're getting higher up on the gun basically. Whereas with like a 1911, well, I've got this extension on here, so that might not be the best example, but we'll go with it, is much straighter. And so you're gonna have more mass coming over the top of your hand. Now, for me, I like the more acute angle for you geometric shape nerds. The acuteness helps you control the muzzle better. However, the problem with that is if you're a weaker person, you get injured, you're tired, whatever, you just don't hold on to the gun as tight as you should, then you can more quickly or easily lose the momentum of the slide and cause a malfunction. So even though it does help with control and mitigating muzzle flip, which is a cool word for like how high the gun jumps in your hand, it can also maybe cause a problem if you're a weakling and don't hit the gym. So if you have a more obtuse angle, it kind of mitigates that. And it kind of points a little bit better and faster for most people. Not everyone, but most. However, it doesn't control the recoil as well because now you have all this recoil coming up higher up over your hand. So it's like if you were to hold a stick at the very end of the stick and somebody pushes on the other end, you're not gonna have much control. But if you get closer to where they're pushing, you have more control. It's the same thing with this as getting closer to the slide, the action, where everything's happening. The closer you can get higher up on it, the more control you have on it. So those are all things to consider when you're looking at these things. And when we go in deeper into grips and stance and all that kind of stuff, you'll kind of see how this all comes together and how it all actually works in real life with actually shooting. And it'll hopefully make a whole lot more sense if it doesn't now. So keep watching and we'll be back with the next video as soon as I can. Thanks.